Like this song says, are you ready for me, baby? I actually didn't even realize that was the lyrics of that song because that's from a while back that I chose that. But as it's playing, I'm like, yeah, I'm back on the air after like a 2-month break and this fits. Are you ready for me, baby? What's up, everyone? Welcome to The Altar with me, your host, Colby Martin. And as I just mentioned, it's been a minute since I have been with you. Are you ready for me, baby? Because I am ready for you. I'm so glad to be back here with you. In today's show, most of the time I'm gonna spend interacting with a conversation that I had on YouTube with the evangelical apologist, Dr. Sean McDowell. I'm gonna share a bit about my experience with that and some things I wish I would have said differently. Feedback, or I'm gonna respond to some of the more common points of criticism that show up in the comment section. Anyway, all that and more here live with you from the brand new to us studio garage space. Welcome to The Altar. Let's get into it. All right. First things first. As I mentioned there in the cold open, this is a brand new studio space, and I have not streamed. I've not done my show in a couple months. So I'm out of practice is where I'm getting at. So there's going to be, I imagine, multiple times where the wrong thing will be happening on the screen, and maybe you won't be able to hear me, or maybe sound won't be working. All that might happen. And as always, like I say, when it's live, everything's jive. I don't really care. But just let me know in the comment section if something does get a little bit wonky, or you're like, hey, can't see you, or we can't hear you. So just, grace for me as I start to do the show again and remember how all the buttons work and all the scenes work. And so we'll get there together. But thank you, Shane. Shane says, I like the way the studio looks. Great job. Thank you. Maybe I'll do a little tour at some point, but I'm really happy with how it is coming along. I've got in the back there this nice dramatic statement of love wins. And this is a piece of art that was made for me by my friends Jamie and Michael Lynn. Over here, we've got the Shire. It's a little bit blurred out from the depth of field there, but that says the Shire, and it's a travel poster. If I go like this, then now you can probably see it. Yeah, there it is, the Shire. Because I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, which is also represented here. These are the boxed sets of the digital video discs. I also have them on Blu-ray, and then I also have them Apple TV digital download. What do you want from me? I'm a fan, okay? And then I've got some nice lights here. I've got a little bit of books. Over there's a bookshelf that you can't really see. And there's lights galore. So many lights. What they don't tell you when you get into this world of live streaming and video is you just need a crap ton of lights. Get all the lights you can, baby. Get some lights and then get some more lights, because it's all about the lights. Thanks, Pastor Nar. Pastor Nar says, great new look. Appreciate that. Brooke says, studio looks fab. Thank you, Brooke. Who else do we got here? Speaking of Brooke, I'm also happy to be back. I'm glad you're happy. I'm happy to be back. Yay, Bethany. Hi, good to see you again. Glad to be back as well. Greetings to you, Shane. Gustavo, I'm excited you're here as well. Hi, Susan. I'm glad to be back as well. Susan says hello to everybody else. Mercy Morgan, so excited for The Altar. That makes two of us. Well, I think more than two of us if I'm paying attention to what's coming in here. What's up, Pastor Nar? We got some cross-pollination going as Pastor Nar and Susan and Mercy are all greeting each other. Mike K, hey, buddy. Good to have you here. Glad you are with us. Shane says, so far everything's been perfect. Well, that's what I like to hear. Although, does that mean there's nowhere to go but down? Maybe? Is that the pessimistic way to look at it? Kiana. Hi, Kiana. Feels like it's the first time on the show. Glad you're here. I love progressive Christianity. If it becomes the dominant form, Christianity might actually be a force for good in this world. Say it one more time for the people in the back. Let's give that a little bit. I like that. Charlene says, beautiful setting. Thank you, Charlene. I'm, like I said, I'm happy with how it's coming along. Shane's coming in with the LOTR support. Got it on all the formats too. Extended, theatrical. Not going to criticize my choices. Appreciate that, Shane. I love it. Hey, Odette from Puerto Rico's here. Glad to have you. We got Meg Lovins coming in hot from Tulsa. Anybody else out there that wants to say hi and see your little name and profile there and let me know where you're watching from? Good life. You're nervous and it shows. Maybe this might be nervous energy. I haven't done this in a couple months. I'm also just, it's a little bit me. So that happens. Gwen says, first time coming, love your books and appreciate you during my spiritual journey. Thank you, Gwen. That means a lot. Destiny Mink, hearts to you as well. Hey, speaking of inviting you to comment, here's a little segment I call the viewer sound off. I want to hear from you. And the question today is this. Here it comes, right up here. Tell me something good about your life in the past 2 months, because we haven't been with each other in 2 months. I've been offline as we have moved houses and moved our church and get settled in and get the studio all set up and just a whole bunch of other things. So we haven't hung out in a bit. And I want to know, like, tell me something good about your life. Tell me something good. Give me some good news. Give me some euangelion. Give us some gospel from your life from the past 2 months. Pick anything. Maybe it was a good Thanksgiving. Maybe it was a good Halloween. Maybe it had nothing to do with holidays. Maybe something at work, personal life. Are there some goals you've met? Are there some accomplishes you've achieved? That's kind of the same thing, but I'm redundant. What do you want from me? Hi, Aaron West. Aaron West. Hey, I think we just exchanged some electronic mails. Oh, I'm so glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us. We got Evan Costner. Not to be confused with Kevin. Sorry, Evan. I'm sure you get that a million times. I will try to be less hacky. That's not true. That's not true. If there's low-hanging fruit, I'm going to grab that. But I'm so glad you're here. In SC, I assume that's South Carolina, not Southern California, but I don't really know. Brooke's got a new boyfriend and he's amazing. That is good news. Thanks for sharing, Brooke. We celebrate that. Shane also moved. Hey, look at that. It's the season of moving. Moved to a new house, starting to feel like a home. Yeah, that takes a little bit of time, doesn't it? For a house to become a home. It's one of the many things I appreciate about my wife is when we move into a new location, she gets from all boxes to no boxes like in a day or two. It's amazing the way that she voraciously sets up the new house to become a home. It's a real gift. Yes, Susan, this is good news. Susan says my poem was published in the Mental Health Awareness Anthology titled There's a Monster Inside I'm Learning to Love. Susan, I'm so freaking proud of you. We celebrate you. I'm so just delighted that you not only are writing more, but that you are taking that vulnerable, courageous step to like submit it and show it to others and be like, hey, want to include this? And they did. That's fantastic. You also get a DJ air horn. Who else we got here? Gustavo. What a precious thing to share. Gustavo said, I decided to come out of the closet to my mom and brother. It's still not great, but I'm sure it's a good thing. All right, everybody. Can you give Gustavo some love? Man, so proud of you, bud. So proud of you. Cannot, especially since you said it's still not great. This tells me that there was a time at which you found a connection with your own identity as a particular orientation. There was that time, and then the time between when you said that you decided to come out, like that gap. I don't know how long that was, but I can imagine that gap, that time was filled with fear, anxiety, stress, worry, confusion. And then you did it. You did it, brother. You found the bravery, the courage, maybe his desperation, which ain't no shame, like no shame there. If it's one part bravery, one part desperation, all that belong, but you did it. And we're just so proud of you. So we celebrate that with you. And we pray for future conversation between you and your loved ones, that there would be wholeness and healing and peace. But man, well done. It's freaking awesome. Gwen says, been writing some songs to get me through this deconstruction season, keeping me hopeful, very healing. I love that. Make that art, Gwen. It's fantastic. Barry got engaged to a handsome Marine. Gary. Congratulations to you. That's fantastic. Many happy returns for when the day comes. I love that. Mike got his first dog last month. That's awesome. I mean, for dog lovers, that's awesome. If you've watched my show or know much about me, I like my dog, but that's only because we got her as a puppy and everybody likes baby animals. And then I just sort of tolerate and like her, but I'm happy for you, Mike. That sounds fantastic. Mercy's been going back to the office, which includes a 2-hour lunch with your bestie / boss. Great time since work. Wow. That's a big deal. Getting back out into the non-working from home context. Aaron's really enjoying their new home that we moved into this summer. Love that. Love hearing all the moves. That's going well for people. Oh, Bethany says, I've actually had a hard 2 months with a family loss in October. I'm sorry. But have been loving living in Portland. So, mixed bag. LOL. Glad you like Portland, though. Glad you like Portland. It's a cool city. Sorry about your loss. Shane says, proud of you, Gustavo. Feel it, buddy. Feel it. Brooke says, this is amazing. Praying for things to get easier. Mike says, proud of your bravery. Odette says, that's so, come on, feel it. Let all this sink in. And you got to sit with it, right? Because the research shows us that we have to sit with positive news for 7 full seconds before it can actually sink into us. Whereas negative things, they'll come in and they'll just immediately impact us. But positive, we got to really sit with. So receive all of this goodwill. What else we got here? Bethany says, it's the hardest and best thing. Proud of you for coming this far and trust that you've got it in you to keep going. So fantastic. And then we've got some questions coming in from Good Life. Hey, we might get the questions later, but now is not the time in our show quite yet for questions. This has been the Viewer Sound Off. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Great, that worked. Hey, I pushed that button not knowing if it was actually going to do a transition, and it did. So that's exciting. A couple things before I get into the main part of the show. And the first is this. I have, many of you know that a couple months ago, it's been multiple months ago, whatever, doesn't matter. Some number of months ago, I put out my Unclobber Workshop as an online course, a 4-part online course where you can explore Genesis, you can explore Leviticus, you can explore Romans, and then you can explore 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy. And put them in an online course format, so where you can get personalized teaching through video lectures with on-screen graphics and a customized workbook that you can work through. And these have been, these have been selling the last few months. You can go to courses.unclobber.com to learn more. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up today is because I have created a way for people to, let's see if I can do this correctly. courses.unclobber.com/gift. Page not found. Okay, well, that didn't work. I told you there was going to be some mistakes. I made a way because somebody asked me, how can I get this as a gift for somebody? And so I made a way to do that so that you can buy like a gift certificate. Oh, biscuits. But where is that link? The cheat sheets, the group page. All right. I don't think I put it on the homepage yet. Well, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. There's group packages. There's the free intro course. Okay. Well, irregardless of my point here, there is a way to buy this as a gift so that you can send it to someone for the holidays. And I should probably have been better prepared for what that link is. I thought it was courses.unclobber.com/gift. Doesn't matter. I'll try to drop it in the description later on if anybody's interested, where you purchase the online course and then you get the coupon that makes it free. And then you can send that to your friend, family member, whatever, and say, hey, Merry Christmas or Happy Holiday. Got you this online course for free. So that's the thing. Or you can just buy it for yourself. Also, fun fact. Then the other thing I wanted to tell you about is I have a Substack page called Perspective Shift. And Perspective Shift is my weekly-ish, like all the things. I've been off for a couple months here. But it gets sent out on Wednesday mornings, and it is with Substack, you can go and subscribe for free, and you can read all past articles, and then you'll be signed up to receive this newsletter in your inbox every Wednesday. And I write about a variety of things, usually having to do with religion, spirituality, psychology, some version of those things. And today, the newsletter that went out, or the article that went out, was titled "Your Past Does Not Define You, but neither," I say it both ways, "neither does it ignore you." Let's get that out of the way. And so if you wanted to go check it out, you can go to perspectiveshift.co. You can see the little URL down there in the corner. And I had some thoughts about how, I believe that all of us carry wounds from our past, specifically in the adolescent childhood. And a lot of those wounds for many of us could even be described as trauma or traumatic. And I believe that to the extent that we understand and are aware of and name our past wounds and our past failures and our past hurts and all of that, owning our past, what I'm saying is owning our past is directly connected to how successful we will be in terms of becoming the type of person we want to become. Knowing where you came from, knowing why you are the way you are, owning your past trauma and getting healing from it and finding a way to heal from it will increase your odds that you can actually become the type of person you want to become. And the inverse of that is ignoring your past or repressing your trauma or just not being aware of it will almost certainly block you and prevent you from wholehearted living and peace and well-being. So anyway, so that's a little bit of what I wrote about today. I invite you to go check that out. And then at the end, you can click this link here because this is a small excerpt of a talk that I gave at my church on the same topic this last Sunday. So you can also go and find the link for that. You can watch that here. Anyway, so all that is at perspectiveshift.co. And oftentimes on the altar, I will read the article or show an excerpt like I just did there. But you're welcome to go do that. It's a free newsletter, and perspectiveshift.co is where that's at. Okay. So what I wanted to do with the bulk of our time here today, well, look at this. Charlene's given some love for Perspective Shift. I find Perspective Shift very valuable, well thought out, and timely. Thank you. You win today, or you win for that moment. We got one more update from the last 2 months. Kiana says, I've been enjoying changing career. Congratulations, Kiana. That's awesome. I've started disability support work and I'm loving it. Well, we applaud you. Well done. Okay. Here's how I wanted to spend the rest of our time together. On Friday, I did a live interview conversation with an evangelical apologist, which is like a fancy religious word to say someone who defends their faith. An evangelical apologist and professor, Dr. Sean McDowell. And Sean McDowell is the son of Josh McDowell, and Josh McDowell I didn't know personally, but I knew of him growing up and in college because Josh McDowell wrote this book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And I loved it back in the height of my evangelical days because it was all about like proving a particular perspective on the Bible and proving particular ideas about Jesus. So very, very heavy on the getting the right answers and proving it. And that's Josh McDowell. I'm not linking Sean to Josh other than biologically. And then also Sean is still in that world, is still in the evangelical world, but I don't want to, actually, I think he did co-author like an updated version. So maybe they're more tightly related, but anyway, so I went on with Sean several months ago for the first time. And he invited me on just to kind of share about progressive Christianity. And I had a really lovely experience with Sean, getting to know him. And I find him to be a very generous host and a charitable interlocutor. One of the main things that we share in common is a commitment to practicing charitable and respectful conversations with people that we disagree with, which is increasingly a challenging thing to do. We all kind of have our silos, our echo chambers. And when we do sort of converse with people on the other side of any particular topic, it's oftentimes just lobbing attacks from afar and not really listening, and not knowing how to share how we think and feel without being defensive and not being able to receive other people's perspective. So anyway, I have for a couple of years now had this internal desire to practice more of that, to be a type of person who can charitably converse with people I disagree with. I don't know that I do it well, and I'll get into more of that here in a little bit. But I think that's why I say I practice it. So I'm trying. And so Sean had me on several months ago to talk about progressive Christianity, and the experience was largely positive. The thing I didn't like about the experience is that when I do live shows like this, I'm used to paying attention to the comments. You're right. You've seen how much I engage with you, and I pay attention to the comments. It's kind of the whole show's interactive like that. And I didn't think to not do that when I was with Sean on his channel, because his channel and his audience is evangelical conservative Christians. And so I was talking with Sean, doing the live thing. This was our first time many months ago. And I'm also simultaneously watching the comment section. Bad idea. Like, it was throwing me off to see the number of people who were, just there to be really negative. Well, I don't know if they were there to be negative, but they were there and they were very negative, not charitable, not kind, not respectful. So then when Sean invited me to come back on and discuss the topic of LGBTQ relationships, I said, I'd love to come back on. It sounds great, but here's my one ask is, can you at the top of the show, please invite everyone to be kind and respectful and charitable in the comment section. Now, obviously you can't control all of that, but you can set a tone for that, and you can set an expectation. And he said, yeah, I totally agree. I'll absolutely do that. And he did. And so that was great. And then also I ignored the comment section, except for maybe one or two times. But so I had a much more positive experience on Friday. Sean continued to be gracious and kind and charitable. And it was a really good conversation, I thought. And like emotionally and bodily, I was more present and more able to enjoy it because I was not watching people as they were saying their less than kind things. But since then, I've been thinking about our conversation, and there's particularly a couple moments that came up, and some ways that I responded to the question, or some answers or some responses that I gave that I didn't love. Like, it wasn't a great response, or I wish I would have said it a little bit differently. And my hope for our time today was I was going to like compile all these clips and interact with him. I only got a couple clips done, so maybe I'll do another one of these later on. But here's a few moments, and I'll play the clip and then pause it and just unpack it a bit more, because I think there are a few times where I wish I would have pressed in more, or I pressed in fine, but I still found Sean's response unsatisfactory, and so I wanted to share with you put some more meat on that. Anyway, so I'm going to start here. Let's see, what's this scene? Oh yeah, this is follow-up thoughts about my live conversation with Dr. Sean McDowell. And then if you want to go to Sean McDowell's YouTube page, you can see the whole thing. It's almost an hour and a half. We talked for quite a bit. And for the most part, I thought it was a really lovely conversation. Okay, so here's the first thing. So let me go back to that other scene. The format that Sean wanted to start with is he had 3 questions ahead of time, and he wanted me to go first on all of them, and then let him respond. And it started with, why is this a topic that I talk and write about? And I shared the kind of 3 stages of that it was originally a theological thing for me, that I discovered that the Bible doesn't say what we've always thought it said about LGBTQ people and relationships. 2, then it became a sense of personal responsibility, because I had been a part of this system and religion that had been so oppressive. And so I'm like, I need to be a part of now undoing that. And then 3rd, sort of a larger commitment to this idea of God being love, this larger commitment to wholeness and peace and shalom and justice. And so this is why I do that. Second question is, what's my position on LGBTQ relationships? And I didn't explain that one as well, because I kind of forgot the part where I come out hard saying, and I don't think the Bible provides any justification to discriminate against queer people. But that, I think, was hopefully obvious, because Sean brought me on and the introduction showed Unclobber. So I think my position on that was pretty clear, but I wish I would have wrapped that in more tightly. And then he asked about how should the church reform? And I invite you to go back and watch that section, because I thought I answered that well when I talked about the need for theological reform, obviously. But then one of the things, and I probably talked about it on the show before, but this bait and switch that many churches do, where they say that all are welcome, everyone, we love all people. But then when LGBTQ people show up, they realize, oh, but that's not really true. I'm welcome here, but I can't serve. I'm welcome here, but I can't be on staff. I'm welcome here, but I can't get married here. So it's not it's welcome or sense of belonging. And I loathe that with all of my being. I drive by churches here in San Diego, or there's billboards, this billboard, there's a church here, I think it's called Foothills Church, some generic evangelical church. And it's big old billboard, you belong here. And I just want to climb up in the dead of night with spray paint and be like, except not really. There's all sorts of caveats for that. So that stuff drives me freaking nuts. And then after that, in our conversation, then Sean opened it up and allowed me to ask a few questions. And so one of the questions that I asked him, one of the things I wanted to explore with him, is I wanted to know if Sean could share what it felt like how does it feel for him to counsel people that come to him that are LGBTQ, and he tells them, your only option here is celibacy. Your only option here is singleness, because Sean agrees with me that people's orientation don't change. And I was actually relieved and maybe a little surprised. I think I could have assumed, because I think more and more rational thinking people, Christians included, are waking up to the fact that the whole reparative therapy thing is a sham, that people's orientation, you can't pray the gay away. So that I was glad to hear that Sean agrees with that people's orientation, it doesn't change. But then, so that what that leaves them at is then the counsel for people to just remain single and to remain celibate. And I wanted to know what that felt like. Sean could describe what that felt like to tell people that. So here's his response, and then I have another thought on it. So let's see if this works. I'm assuming that your counsel, your advice, your direction for them would be singleness, because marriage isn't an option for them. Mm-hmm. How does it feel for you to say that to people?
One is some of the same-sex attracted Christians, friends of mine, I won't mention, just won't call them out, who have told me many times that God's guidelines and design for marriage and singleness actually sets them free. A number of my same-sex attracted friends have said to me, hey, keep speaking what Scripture says. Have the boldness and have the clarity and the conviction, because as Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So I believe that, and I know you do too, I believe that what I hold about sexuality is in line with what Jesus held, in line with what the Scripture has. So I firmly believe there's a kind of freedom that comes emotionally and intellectually from aligning one's life with God's design.
There's a type of freedom, Sean says there, that comes, type of like mental, spiritual freedom that comes with aligning yourself with God.
So I hurt with somebody, I mourn with that person, I try to be gentle with that person, but I think it is actually truth in God's design in Scripture that brings freedom. So I really believe that that person, if they live out and follow what Jesus taught, will experience a different kind of freedom.
All right, so he took the question in a slightly different direction, which is fine. But I really was trying to get into the experience that he has, like, and he said it there a little bit, like, I have compassion for them. I care about them, but I was hoping to maybe get at, like, it can't feel good to tell someone, like, yeah, sorry, if you want to honor God, you're going to have to just stay single your whole life. Like, I know you see me and my spouse and our kids, and I know you might have dreamt about having a family one day, and I know you might really even be in love with this other person and want to spend the rest of your life with them, but you can't do that if you want to honor God. I find that just an abhorrent and damaging position. I mean, I think that goes without saying that that's my opinion on it. So I can't imagine what it would feel like to then say that to somebody. And I trust that Sean is a compassionate person. Like, everything that I've gotten from him says that. So I'm sure he delivers that news with kindness, but at the heart, it's a horrible piece of news. Like, it's not gospel. It's not good news. It's not good news. It's bad news. You have to stay single. You have to stay celibate. And I talk about this a lot, that in the creation story, there is God creating all the things, and it's good, and it's good, and it's good, and it's good. Everything is good. And the flow of goodness stops once it gets to man being alone. And God's like, it's not good to be alone. So to then require that a person be lonely is, like, fundamentally, in my opinion, going against kind of the flow of creation. Now, some of the objections to that are, there are some LGBTQ individuals who have found a type of celibacy and singleness that doesn't feel lonely to them. And okay, great. I'm happy for you. We're happy for you. That's cool. And how can we expect that to be the path for all of them? For all of those all people who identify as gay, lesbian, etc. If a person wants to really use the Bible as their compass for how to live their life, then let's be clear that celibacy is seen as a something that somebody chooses. It shouldn't be chosen for them. So if a particular person feels called to or is drawn to that life, and they feel a sense of freedom in that, that's lovely. But that's not the case for a majority of those who identify LGBTQ. So anyway, I wanted to try to hear from Sean. Like, I was hoping he would just say, it feels awful. I hate it. I hate giving that counsel. It feels horrible to stare at this young man or this young woman and say, if you want to honor God, you have to just choose singleness. But I don't even know if that's how he feels. And and certainly not how he answered. But how he did take the question, you see that quote down there, is that he's like, I have a handful of friends who have told me that once they really leaned into and embraced what, Sean refers to as the historic view on sexuality, that it has led them to a greater sense of freedom. And I have follow-up questions on that. And so one of the things that I responded to Sean with, and I said, what makes you believe those individuals? What makes you believe them that they really did find more freedom? So let's listen to Sean's response here. Why do you believe these people when they tell you that, hey, when I embraced the more historic view of sexuality, then I felt more free? What makes you believe those friends of yours that tell you that? You say you have friends that told you that when they leaned more into sort of your reading of the Bible, that they experience, I think you said they experience a type of freedom. What makes you believe them?
I mean, I guess the same reason I would believe any of my other friends on anything. I don't think it's unique to this issue that it's not with others, but this is probably, I mean, maybe half a dozen friends where we've spent a lot of time and in some cases shed some tears. And they've told me distinctly from their own experience and understanding of Scripture, that this has brought a kind of freedom for them. Now, some people have come out of certain experiences in their past that they felt were far more damaging, relationships that did not line up with God's design, and are saying, okay, time out. Now I understand why God gives these particular commandments. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
it didn't really all that much. I think that as we went on in the conversation, I'm trying to find a non-awful frame to freeze it on. Essentially what Sean was saying, and it comes up a little bit later, how I understood him to be saying is he doesn't take their word for it just because it's their word. He takes their word for it as long as it maps onto what Sean would identify as the correct way to understand the Bible on this particular matter. And I asked him this question because it was a little bit leading, but I really did want to know, like, why do you believe your friend's account when they tell you, hey, I feel more free now that I have become more traditional in my theology on this? Because where I wanted to go with it was, well, why don't you believe LGBTQ Christians when they say, I actually experience and feel more freedom when I have moved away from the historic view of Christianity? So let me share that clip and then share a bit more about that.
That's a great question, by the way. Very. So
why don't you believe?
And here's what I would say, because
others.
The basis of my view of this is not somebody's experience. That's not where my theology comes from. So clearly, because people can say, hey, I'm free following the historic Christian path. Hey, I'm free not following the historic Christian path. Then we have to point to something besides somebody's lived experience as the basis of what's actually true. Now, that could be some objective scientific data about the person's psychological health.
I think
that would be one way.
That would help.
But as Christians, I want to go back to Scripture. So people...
I really thought that was interesting, by the way, that he threw that in there. I don't know how much of it was because he would agree with that, or how much he was maybe just sort of trying to anticipate how I would respond. But he was basically saying, like, yeah, you could maybe get some sort of read on a person's mental well-being through, psychological efforts or other psychiatric. Like, you could maybe measure if a person really is doing well in these other metrics. And then he's like, but I think we have to just go back to the Bible.
Tell me they feel that way. I'm not going to say they're liars. Of course they feel that way. But ultimately, as a Christian, I'm going to have to say our feelings and our experience of freedom needs to line up with what Scripture says.
Okay. So I really wish people would be more transparent with what they mean when they say that, because what Sean doesn't actually mean by what Scripture says, what really that's short for, and I've talked about this over and over again, that's short for what I understand Scripture to say, or what my interpretation of Scripture is. Because there is no such thing as just what Scripture says. It's just, these are just words on a page. We have to, there has to be some interpretive work to understand them. There has to be some effort to go from a word on a page to then embodying it and living it out. So it's not just, does it line up with what Scripture says? It's, does it line up with what I am understanding Scripture to say and to mean? And so that really is the gist of it. The reason why Sean would accept the testimony of one of his gay friends who found more freedom when they reverted back to a more historic view of sexuality, the reason why he would accept their testimony as true is because it also lines up with Sean's understanding of what is true as it relates to sexuality. And so and in the conversation, I did acknowledge in real time where I'm like, all right, I guess it's also kind of true that, like, you, Sean, probably wouldn't really believe my LGBTQ brothers and sisters and siblings who say the opposite of that. You wouldn't really believe them. You'd be like, yeah, I know you say you're experiencing more freedom and more life, but I don't believe you. In a similar way, I acknowledged in the video, and I also would carry some skepticism around the people that Sean's talking about. The individuals who say, I found more freedom leaning in towards a more historic view. Now, again, I did say a minute ago that I believe it's possible that there are those who can find great life and fulfillment in celibacy and singleness. That's great. I just don't think that's for everybody. My experience has been, not personal, my experience as far as like being in a relationship with people and studying this stuff for years, is that such a position that Sean describes is not a long-lasting or sustainable position. So I would be curious to check back in with those 6 friends that Sean referenced, or half a dozen friends that Sean referenced. I'd like to check back in with them in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And be like, okay, do you still feel that way? Do you still feel like leaning in towards singleness and celibacy and repressing your innate desires and attractions? Is that leading to, like, do you feel good? Is life going well for you? In fact, I just want to share with you, I got an email late last night and I got the guy's permission to read it. A guy watched this video, and that particular interaction right there. And he emailed and he said that 25 seconds there summed up the difference for him. And this guy's name is Steve. And Steve says, the people that Sean referred to as experiencing freedom, and this is a real email, by the way, I'm not just making up Steve. The people that Sean referred to as experiencing freedom in their singleness, Steve says, I'm speaking from experience. This absolutely can happen, but isn't sustainable. Thought that was really interesting. And this is all anecdotal. I get it, but I think these stories matter. It can happen, Steve says, but it's unsustainable. Eventually, Stephen says, my true feelings and attractions were too strong to ignore. He said, I now understand how damaging this was, but because my biblical view was like Sean's, I was willing to do all kinds of mental gymnastics to try and align my body and my mind with that view. So the email goes on to talk about how once he moved away from some of those historic views specifically about what the Bible is and isn't, who God is and isn't, what the sort of a better understanding of sexuality is. He says, after years of struggling and feeling shame about my attraction to men, I finally embraced it, Steve says. What has transpired since is crazy. For the first time, listen to this. For the first time in my life, I'm attracted to all sexes. I have freedom and love in being able to express myself and being embodied enough to love myself. This allows me to love everyone. And none of this would have been possible if I didn't love myself first. I'm still putting this into practice. I've got a long way to go, but I've also come a long way. So anyway, that's just one example of how, for me, or one illustration of, that's the story that I would submit to Sean could be the future outcome for some of those friends that he referenced. I have no doubt, and Stephen says it, like, there for a window of time, you might be able to find some quote unquote freedom or happiness or sense of well-being in this sort of repressed state or this singleness state. I just don't think it's sustainable. And I just don't think it's how we're meant to live. I don't think it's how we're meant to be by God's design, by the Bible's design, etc. And then I hear conversely to those of you who might feel more like Sean, that you might say, well, yeah, but isn't that the same thing is true about the people that you are talking about? Meaning those, I would articulate, or I would advocate that those LGBTQ Christians who found more freedom and more life and more well-being and more wholeness and more goodness in their life when they accepted who they were and they loved who they were and they realized the Bible doesn't condemn them and they realize God doesn't condemn them and they can have relationships with people of the same sex and they can experience connection and intimacy, and that leads to greater freedom and wholeness. I can hear Sean and others say, okay, but that is, we've got examples of how that led people towards destruction, and that people, have testimonies of how actually me living out my gayness is what led to the worst, darkest parts of my life. And I have read those stories too. I know those people and I've read those stories too. People who say, no, actually it's the opposite. If I lived into my gayness, that's what led to the darkest and the pain. And that's, those stories are out there too. I guess one of the things I would say to that is it's a lot more complicated than just that. It's a lot more complicated than just, are you letting your sexual identity and orientation have manifestation? And if you are, then that leads to goodness. And if you're not, it's not that simplistic. There are so many other factors at play. There are oftentimes what happens is a person who goes through years of religious repression and shame about their sexual orientation, and they try that life of celibacy and singleness, or they even try to heal from their orientation, or they try and whatever, become something they're not, is that builds up so much like biological, neurological stress and toxins in the body. Like it makes a person so unwell on so many levels, so much trauma and damage inside, that oftentimes what happens is then that person might sort of swing the pendulum the other way, or just open up a little bit of a doorway to some of the outlet. And I think we need to hold space for the fact that oftentimes what happens is that comes out in all sorts of, it just, when the pressure finally has release, it just explodes. And what I'm getting at is it's not fair. I don't think it's not fair to then be like, well, that person who had all these years of repression and then sort of it exploded like that, that's atypical of, that's not illustrative of what a healthy and well-balanced relationship should look like. There's lots of other things that contribute to why maybe that person, when they did live the quote gay lifestyle for a season, experienced it as dark and damaging and worse. Making the connection to that just being because they let themselves be gay for a season, I think is the wrong connection to make. I think there's other explanations as to why that maybe wasn't as fulfilling or wasn't as whole. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit lost in the weeds on this, and I'm not the best person to talk about this topic, but I think it bums me out when people like Sean put so much stock into his half a dozen friends that say, actually, I found more freedom and life has gone better for me when I became more traditional in my theology. It bums me out when they put so much stock in that, A. Two, when they don't give the same amount of weight to the testimonies of the queer Christians who have the complete opposite experience, who say, no, you don't understand. Moving out of the historic view of Christianity is the thing that unlocked a world of freedom for me. And later on in the video, Sean and I tried to share different ideas about what freedom is, but for Sean, it seems to come back to, well, it's only real freedom if it matches up with my view of Scripture. It's only your testimony is only reliable if it matches up with how I think about the Bible. So anyway, that was one thing that I thought I wish we could have maybe had some more time on, but I think we would have just hit a dead end where it's like, okay, Sean, so basically you're saying if someone has your theology, then they can experience freedom. But if someone doesn't have your theology, then their freedom is fake, or their freedom is not, like, I don't really know where to go from there. And Sean says we have to point to something besides someone lived experience. I think, I know what you're saying in terms of, for you, like, it's got to be rooted in a particular perspective of the Bible. I guess I just disagree. I guess I just disagree. I think we can allow people to sometimes be a reliable narrator, a trustworthy narrator of their own experience. Not always. Oftentimes we're not great narrators of our own experience. Oftentimes we don't know what we're thinking, or we don't know what's good for us. Yes, we get that wrong sometimes too. But to just say you're only free if you have my theology, I think is dangerous territory to be in. Okay, one more clip here. This is when we started talking about marriage, and I was trying to figure out if Sean could help me understand why he believes that God has one specific design and intention for marriage. Why do you believe that? And then how do you live that out in any real practical sense? So I tried to ask, like, when is a couple actually considered married? If there is this, and I talked about, like, if there's this divine document somewhere that God has, like, a file particular on marriage, and God's like, this is here is what is actually considered a marriage. The fundamental premise of conservative Christianity is that anything that's not that is a sin. Anything that is not this is a sin. Whether that's premarital sex or extramarital sex, or a marriage that is not between one man and one woman. Like, this is the assumption, is that there is a one way that marriage works. Anyway, I was trying to, like, figure that out. How does that actually work? So let's watch this clip, and I'll kind of pause it and we'll get into it. Or no, it's not till it's, like, in the file folder. I would like you to admit, if you're comfortable, that the point at which someone becomes actually officially married is not only a sort of nebulous, hard to pin down, slippery target, but it is changed, and it's different depending on culture, depending on time and history. And the reason why I think that is worth pointing out is because I think in some part that pushes back a little bit against this idea that God has this one very simple biblical idea of what marriage is, and that we can just know what it is. I don't think that's true. I don't think we can say this is the point at which that couple's married. Not then, yes, no, yes. How do you reconcile that? How do you?
So my honest answer is,
does that question even make sense?
It does make sense, and my answer might not be what you expect.
That's fine.
I don't see why it matters. Now let me explain why. Just because there's,
I'll let him finish there, but I think the reason why for me it does matter is because and by I kind of just mean you're a stand-in, or Sean's a stand-in of the larger evangelical movement. Your fundamental premise is that there is one way that marriage is blessed by God. And if you're not willing to sort of say, here is where that way begins and here's where it ends, then what's the point? Like, what are we doing here? And so he kind of goes on to talk about how that's just sort of, there's some cultural, like, maybe it's different in different cultures, but the bigger point is it one man, one woman who leaves father and mother and has sexual union? And I'm like, okay, but what point can they, quote unquote, have sexual union where it's no longer a sin? And I don't think this is just a red herring semantic argument. I think this is actually kind of important to evangelicalism's underlying premise about marriage.
Debate about the particular moment that somebody is married doesn't mean we can't distinguish an essence of marriage from something that's not married. In fact, maybe you'll like this one, maybe not. It's the fallacy of the beard, right? Exactly at what point does somebody have a beard? And we can debate some of the particulars, but I know that you have a beard and I know that I don't.
Thank you.
When we look at marriage, I'm talking Jewish tradition and Christian tradition. There's no debate until.
But isn't there a little bit? Because the Old Testament is littered with Jewish examples of different kinds of, like, of multiple wives and concubines. And I know that the response to that is, well, that's after the fall, or those aren't actually prescribed in the Old Testament. That's just description. Like, that's just what people did, but it wasn't God's best. It wasn't God's ideal. God's best and ideal is one man, one woman. But I think that's kind of a little bit what I'm trying to get at here is this idea that for God, there is one way that marriage is expressed. Like, that's not really what we see in the Old Testament. We see marriage expressed in a lot of different ways. So you need, if that is your claim, if you're staking your claim in this idea that there is only one way that it works, then how are you not able to stand by when the marriage actually is a thing? Don't you need to be able to say that's sinful and that's not? And I think point I was trying to make at is that marker has moved in so many different directions throughout different cultures, throughout different times, that by your own definition, like, people are playing with fire. By your own definition, Sean, people are playing with fire. If marriage, according to God, only counts when the county clerk signs the document, then any sex before that, like on the honeymoon, because the paperwork probably hasn't been processed yet, is sinful. I think your people need to know that. Is that sinful? Wow, that's just digging into unnecessary secondary semantics. Is it though? I don't know that it is. So back it up. Okay, so it's not when the county clerk signs the document. It's when the priest says, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Okay, great. So what about the times and cultures where there wasn't a priest to pronounce that? So are those, like, if there wasn't a traditional ceremony that happened in front of family and friends where there was a priest that did the ceremony, like, were they always just having sex in a sinful way? Well, no, that's just secondary semantics. Like, I don't know that it is. I don't know that it is. And I wish I could find a way to communicate this more clearly to where it didn't just get brushed off as a secondary thing, but that's what kept happening.
This generation, that marriage is meant to be permanent, it's a commitment, that it's a sexed institution, and that it's about procreation. I think you're getting lost on the particular secondary issue of exactly when somebody's getting married.
I am getting lost in that, but I think it's because it should matter to you. Like, if the goal for you or for anyone is to not be sinful with our sex, then shouldn't we know when it counts as sin and when not? I don't know why this isn't more, like, obvious, why this point isn't more obvious. Why aren't they concerned with what counts as sin and what doesn't? They don't pretend. I'm not questioning sincerity at all. They put a lot of energy into saying they care greatly about sin in their way of understanding it. And yet, why is it not more clear to them what counts as holy married sex and what counts as not?
Missing the large universal commonality. And the reason it's been held so much in the church is because it's so clear in Genesis, and Jesus spoke on this and in the other passages. Now, that might not be how you expected me to push back, but tell me what you think.
Yeah, I completely submit that from your perspective, I'm losing the forest for the tree. Little Marilyn Manson. Why I'm narrowing in on the tree is because when I was in the evangelical world and when that was my viewpoint, the tree that mattered in the forest was the tree of, is this sin or not? At what point does this become a behavior or an action that the God of the universe would deem wicked and sinful? And at what point is it not? And isn't that a fair question? Don't you want to know that? Example, if we buy into this idea that there's a God that says having a beard is sinful, then we darn well would imagine, and actually we don't have to imagine, like there were in the Jewish scriptures, there were very strict parameters around what length of beard and all that. I was really glad that came to me because I did like his beard fallacy. Like that's a legitimate thing, like that we're getting caught up over semantics, but also it's kind of a true thing that in the Jewish tradition, there was very clear parameters on what to do with facial hair. Anyway, keep it in that not sinful category.
Yeah.
The reason why I think it matters, and I think it matters. I think it needs to matter to you.
Yeah. Not to
when
me, by the way.
Marriage happens and when it actually is God ordained or God approved, is because your fundamental operating position is that
sometimes I don't know how to talk well.
Married sex is sinful.
Yeah.
And that and I'm saying, well, then doesn't that require that you know when a marriage
What
is
counts as
valid in the
married
eyes of
sex?
God and when
That's
it's
right.
not?
I think some of the particular ways this expressed in culture, whether it's in a public vow with people watching from chairs, whether you sign a contract, whether it's a handshake, whatever it is, those are secondary to the biblical minimalist that a man leaves a father and mother.
On one hand, I understand what he's saying, that those are secondary, but that doesn't seem to jive with the rest of evangelicalism's viewpoint on sin. It doesn't seem to jive with me. They seem to be like really interested in what is sin and what isn't sin. And so then to have this black and white model that then sometimes acknowledges a bit of grayness. First of all, I think is great. Let's acknowledge the gray. That's what I was trying to get to, is Sean, is that the evangelical idea that there is one way that God has ordained marriage for all of time, for all of people in all contexts. There's this black and white view of marriage, I think is absurd. And I think it is nothing if not just a series of gray. But Sean makes it sound like there's a black and white primary issue, and then the gray up here, like, don't really worry about that. Don't really worry about that. But that's what church leaders and pastors and theologians, that's what they worry about when they say don't have sex before you're married. When does it count to be married? And I don't think the impetus is, I'm not trying to answer when marriage is. In fact, later on in the conversation, Sean tries to ask me to define marriage, and I did a terrible job of responding, in my opinion. It's one place where I wish I would have been a little more tight with my answer. Well, I wish I was tight with all my answers, which goes into a future conversation here where I'm long-winded, I ramble, I do circular talkings, and I'm repetitive. And that's just me. That's my personality. Welcome to Colby. Many of you that are here, you know that already. But it's fascinating to me how that then gets extrapolated in, like, especially in the comment section, it gets extrapolated in as, because I talk in that way, that therefore I am a deceiver, I am a manipulator, I am a liar. It's like, well, what if that's just how I talk? All right, where did I get off topic? Anyway, I think I'm going to lay this to rest. I think, what else do I say about it?
Can't know what marriage is. Doesn't mean that it's not sexed. Doesn't mean it's not limited to two. It doesn't undermine, because there's particular cultural ways that these commandments are to be practiced. I mean, I don't know any church father throughout history who would say, okay, you've left your mother and father, you've made a commitment, people culturally understand this, but you can't have sex, you're not married because of this particular detail. And maybe we're going round and round on this one.
That's certainly what pastors do today.
Well, if they, I don't know if I've ever seen a pastor do that. Maybe you have. But if they do, then shame on them.
Before you're married, and married is very limited to the ceremony and or the signing of the document. He's saying he doesn't know any church father or even modern day pastor who gets caught up in the particulars of when a person's actually married. I kind of don't. What do you mean? Of course, that is like the whole point. That's the whole point of the purity culture, of the not having sex before marriage. Well, when we say that as church leadership, we have an idea of what marriage is. And that idea, I'm saying, is what makes you so sure that that is the one? What makes you so confident that your conception of when a marriage starts is the one that it maps onto this singular idea of what God? Anyway, this is a horse that I have thoroughly tackled here in this moment. So I won't spend any more time on it. I think I just need to maybe process more how to zero in on why I think this matters, because for me, it should matter. It should matter to the Seans of the world if you are believing that there is one way that a marriage counts and there's one way to have sex that counts within a married relationship. Why do you not care more about when the marriage is official and when it's not? For me, I think that is beside the point. For me, I think that's beside the point. For me, I don't believe that God has this view about sex where God's like, sex is only good in the context of marriage. By the way, that is just not my belief about God. Not even sex is only good in the context of marriage, and then marriage can be defined in many different ways. Like, you might think that's my idea. No, like I just don't think that's how the divine and sex are related. Okay, look, it's 3:11 and I did not get to the other thing I wanted to do today, which was to get into some of the criticisms and the pushback from people in the comment section, address some of the common criticisms, such as, why don't you ever use the Bible when you talk, Colby? Or you ramble on and you don't make sense. Or you don't answer questions straightly. Why do you're like a politician in a debate. Just answer the damn question. Well, nobody says damn because nobody says that. I said damn. Lots of people claim that I'm arrogant. And then I also wanted to talk about how people really don't like that I talk about feelings so much. Okay. I'm not going to get into all of this because I'm already 11 minutes past when I try to end my show. So I'm going to save all this for a future week. Maybe next week. Karen, I know you're out there. I know you're watching. I'm going to have a special guest on next week. Karen Thurston Gilmore, who has a book that she has just put out into the world that I'm really excited to talk to her about. And Karen, I'm wondering if also, in addition to talking about your book, because I know you really enjoy the world of engaging with YouTube comments like I do, what if we responded to these comments together, these common criticisms? So that's an idea that I have. So I'm gonna keep talking about this Sean interview for future weeks because I didn't get to everything, but that's what I wanted to say today. It's just explore a little bit of that. And look, I just rambled more is what I did, but hopefully it was interesting to some of you. If you're watching this on Facebook and you would like to like my page, that's great. This feels so obligatory. Why am I doing this? If you're watching on YouTube and you want to hit subscribe, that's even better. If you don't want to do either of those things, then don't do those things. But I feel like as someone who is in this world, I am obligated to say those things. Okay. It's been fun to be with you. I've missed you. I've missed this. All right. Yeah. I have nothing more to say to that. I'll just end the show here. Thank you all. Charlene says, looking forward to next week. Karen, do not tempt me with a good time. So Karen and I will talk off air if that's something we want to do next week. Jules, what's up, Jules? Good to see you. Good to see you. All right. Thanks, Albert. Oh, hey, Ben. Yes, we missed you. Thank you. Glad you're here. I saw a lot of comments and questions coming in during that whole section. Let me do a quick scroll to see if there's any that I want to address or put up here. I love this, Tommy. So Tommy says that the commands of God are not burdensome. And that's burdensome to put on people. I'm sad for people who live in that mindset. I've been celibate for 4 years, and that's a choice. If I met someone I wanted to be with, I will. I love that. Like, this is for me, one of the things Jesus was trying to say to his audience when he talked about the yoke of the Pharisees. The yoke of the Pharisees, like, putting all these expectations and these weights on people. And says, no, if you like follow, my yoke is easy. It's light. Like this shouldn't be burdensome. This shouldn't be burdensome. So I appreciate that comment, Tommy. That's what came to mind for me. Thanks for this, Kiana. I saw this, wanted to put it up there. We can look at the data, the mental health and well-being of thousands of LGBTQI plus who are progressive versus the health and well-being of those who repress themselves. Yeah, thank you. Like that, we have that data. We know the well-being, the mental health of those who are in these religious constructs where repression and oppression occurs and forced celibacy. Like we know this stuff. And to say that freedom is only when someone lines up with one particular doctrine of the Christian church, I think is completely wrong and dismissive of sort of really what we know. Yeah, Brian. So that is part of why I leaned into. So Brian says, I like the part of the video. He started by saying that he had gay friends who felt freedom. If Sean believes that feelings aren't evidence, then why bring it up? That was why I love that you caught that too. I'm like, oh, interesting. So like their feelings mattered to you, but it only mattered if it already mattered. And I'm not saying it only mattered to Sean but the impression I got is I will believe your account of your feelings is trustworthy if it also fits with the way that I see the Bible. What else? This is great. Yeah, Karen, I think I saw that come in when he was trying to say that it doesn't, like the secondary, what he calls secondary particulars of when a marriage is a marriage doesn't matter. I'm like, it does. It has to matter to you. Is my opinion. All right. This is also a great question. But wait, is it a sin to have sex if you don't have a beard? I mean, come on. Now we're getting into the meat of the show. How did it take an hour and 16 minutes to finally get into what people really want to know? You crack me up. Shane, where was Adam and Eve's priest or county clerk? That's what I want to know. Come on now. Like, it's funny, but it's also like questions like that, I think they matter. If a person is going to hold to this idea that there is only one way that God has said that marriage shall be, then when do people get to have sex that's okay with God? I think you should probably know what your answer to that is. All right. This is great. So living together before marriage is being married, right? I mean, that's some of the ways that you could extrapolate what Sean was saying with if the secondary particulars don't matter, then this whole movement to be like, no premarital sex. It's like, well, I mean, don't get caught up on the particulars of when we're married. Like we're already married. We're just not married. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe we need like married or married. Anyway. All right. I really did. And I said this at the top of the show. I really did thoroughly enjoy my time with Sean. I think Sean is a kind, charitable, gracious person. And I look forward to building a relationship with him. And I thought we had a great conversation, except for all the times when I just rambled and didn't really respond very well. That happens. It happens. Especially when I know that I'm live with 500, because there were 500 people watching that show, 500 people that weren't really there to support my talkings. So maybe if I wasn't like totally nailing all the questions, maybe it's understandable. Oh, Cheryl, I like this. Adam and Eve didn't even have father and mother, so they never were married. They never could do the leaving the father and mother. Oh man, this whole thing started on pre-marital sex, whatever. Okay, that is enough. I've ended 4 times now. I'm like Shane. I'm like the Return of the King. I just had like 5 endings, and this is going to be the 6th and final one. Love you all. See you next week.